All right, we are on lesson 6.5, which is multiplying decimals. This goes off of what we did yesterday with 6.4. We multiplied decimal times a decimal, but we used our models. So we are going to learn just the algorithm with this with no models. So it's kind of the shortcut that we did when we multiplied our decimal by our whole number. So it goes off of that same concept. All right, example 1, it says Nina is buying peanuts in bulk. The peanuts cost 75 cents for each pound. She purchased 2 1/10 pounds of peanuts. How much will Nina pay? Round to the nearest cent. Okay, so for this, we need to take our 75 cents times our 2 1/10 pound, because that's how much each of them cost. Okay. So they start off with that. They do their estimation. 75 cents is closest to what dollar? So closest to $1. And 2 1/10 is closest to what whole number? It's closest to 2. So when I multiply those together, I end up with 1 times 2, which is 2. So my answer should be close to 2. And if not, we either need to relook at our multiplication or relook at where we placed our decimal. Okay, so going from here, it says that we are going to multiply as with whole numbers, and we did this before when we took our decimal times our whole number. So ignore the decimal points, multiply like you would if there were no decimals. So if there were no decimals, this would be 75 times 21. Okay, so let's multiply as if this is 75 times 21. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 7 is 7. Okay, so we're done with our 1. So we add our magic 0. 2 times 5 is 10. So carry my 1, 0 down here. 2 times 7 is 14, plus my 1, 15. So 1, carry my 5. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. And then add, again, we have no decimals here, so add, not worrying about decimals yet. 5 and 0 is 5, 7 and 0 is 7, 5, 1. Okay, so if my problem was 75 times 21, my answer would be 1,575. Okay, so that is step 1 here. Step 2 says count the decimal places. Now, when we did this before, when we had a decimal and whole number, we only had to count one set of decimals because only one of the numbers had decimals in it. So now you have to look at both places. Okay, so looking at my top number, my 75 hundredths, here's my decimal. I have 2 spots to the right of my decimal. So that's where they got their 2 decimal places. And then this one, I have 1 after it. Okay, so all we're going to do now is we're going to combine those two. So I have 2 decimal places on my top one, 1 on my bottom one. When I add those together, I end up with 3 spots total. And that's my third step here. Since 2 plus 1 equals 3, count 3 decimal places to the right to place the decimal point. So that's why in my answer I go from here and I go in 1, 2, 3 spots. And that, we're moving our decimal just like we would when we did our lesson before when it was decimal times a whole number. And then step 4, because we're working with money, it says round to the nearest cent. With that, this would be our dimes, this would be our pennies. So this is my nearest cent. So if you remember our rounding, we look to the right. 5 tells me I'm going to round up. So that means that my answer would be $1.58. And then checking, is that close to our estimation? Yes, it is. So then we are good to go. Okay. All right, looking at the next example. Example 2, it says Marcus is buying a new guitar pick that costs 50 cents. The sales tax is found by multiplying the cost of the guitar pick by 6 hundredths. What is the cost of the sales tax for the pick? So we are taking our 50 cents and our 6 tenths, and we are going to multiply those. Okay? All right, Same thing as before, multiply as if they were whole numbers. Okay, so ignore the decimals for now and just multiply. So we have 6 times 0 is 0, and 6 times 5 is 30. Okay, and then if I went to my 0 here, 0 times 0 would be 0, 0 times 5 would be 0. So since all of that would be 0, we don't have to go on to our other digit because all of the numbers would be 0. All right, count the decimal places. Again, on my top one, I have my decimal 1, 2 spots. And on my second one, I have my decimal 1, 2 spots. So I have 2 places on my first number, 2 places on my second number. So if I add those together in my answer, I need a total of 4. Okay, now when we wrote our number, when we multiplied, it was 300 like this. Okay, if I moved my 4 decimals, which is what they did here, I go from here 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's where it's supposed to be, but there's a blank spot here. Okay, this goes on to our step 3 here. It says annex or put in a 0 to place the decimal. Okay, if I put my decimal point here, I'm only moving it over 3 spots, but I need to go 4, so I have to add that 0 up there. So now I can go 1, 2, 3, 4 spots and place my decimal. Okay, so my answer for that ends up being 3/100. Okay, all right, guided practice. Now, all 6 of these, notice, are the side to side, and we talked about this last week. Remember, whichever one has more digits usually goes on top. And just a reminder as well, this is problem 1. This is problem 2. These numbers are not part of the work. It is the problem number. Okay, so my suggestion for this, I'm just going to go through all of the problems fairly quickly. So I would suggest that you pause the video in between each problem and try the problem and then come back and check it with mine and see if it matches. So I'm going to go ahead and do problem 1. This would be your time to pause and try problem 1 and then check with me. Okay, so we have 6/10 times 8/10. You could write it 0.6 times 0.8. It's the same thing. 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, decimal, I have 1. Decimal, I have 1. So when I add those up, I need to have 2. So from here, 1, 2. And I end up with 48/100. And again, you could put your 0 up front, and that would be fine. This would be your time to pause for number 2. 1 7/10 times 2 4/10. Go ahead and multiply. 7 times 4 is 28. 4 times 1 is 4. Plus 2 is 6. Magic 0. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus 1 is 3. Add those together. You get 408. So now we need to figure out where our decimal goes. From my decimal, I have 1 after it. My decimal, I have 1 after it. So I need a total of 2. So I'm going to move it in 1, 2. And I end up with 4 and 8/100. This will be your time to pause and try number 3. I'm going to switch these 2 around because when I write them, I can leave this 0 off and just have my 9/10. Now, if you switched and you kept the 9/10 first, your work will be a little bit different than mine, but your answer should still match. All right, 9 times 8 is 72. 9 times 3 is 27. Plus 7 is 34. Okay, add up our decimals. 1 after, 1 after, total of 2. So move them in 2, 3, and 42/100. Okay, pause for number 4. All right, 96/100 times 7 and 1/10. Again, if you switch these 2 numbers, your work will be a little bit different, but your answer should be the same. All right, 1 times 6 is 6, 1 times 9 is 9, magic 0, we have 42, 7 times 9 is 63, plus 4 is 67, add those together. All right, so 6,816, let's place our decimal. Decimal 1, 2, decimal 1 spot. So I need a total of 3. So 1, 2, 3. So 6 and 816 thousandths. All right, pause for number 5. 3 and 65 hundredths times 2 and 6 tenths. Let's multiply. 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 6 is 36. Add your 3, 39. 6 times 3 is 18, plus your 3, 21. Cross those off and magic 0. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 6 is 12, plus 1 is 13. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Add them up. All right, let's count our decimals. Decimal 1, 2, decimal 1, so total of 3 that I need to move it. So between my 9 and 4 there. Now you can write this either 9 and 49 hundredths, or you can write it how we have it down here, 9 and 490 thousandths. Same thing. Okay, we can drop that 0, we've talked about that before, and that does not change our number. So either of these would be okay for that one. All right, and our last one, go ahead and pause for number 6. All right, again, totally up to you how you wrote it. If you wrote it with your 7 hundredths on top, it is going to look a little bit different here. So 7 times 2 is 14. 7 times 5 is 35, plus 1 is 6, 36. Okay, now if I did my magic 0, I would have 0 times 2 is 0, 0 times 5 is 0. So my second line would be full of zeros, and when I add those together, I would still get my 364. So I'm not going to go on and do that multiplication. Now I'm going to figure out my decimals. So decimal 1, decimal 1, 2. So I need to move it 3 spots. So in front of my 3. So I have 364 thousandths. All right. Hopefully you practice those and that you don't have any questions. It's very similar to what we did last week when we had our we had our whole number times our decimal. You're adding your decimals, except this time both of them have decimals, so you need to add them together. Another main thing for this, none of our examples had it, but don't forget to annex your zeros in case you need to in your homework. All right, you are done with your notes, so you can go and ask the teacher for the homework assignment. Good luck.